Okay, so welcome. I understand we've got some people here from Perth in Australia, which is amazing. Welcome.
Thank you.
So sorry, you were saying you saw my blurb on LinkedIn
Link.
and
So we've been having conversation. We were given funding by our state government and federal government to develop some respectful relationships, online learning modules for staff in schools, as part of our campaign against family and domestic violence, and starting with the 4 drivers of family and domestic violence and what that may mean. And we talked about, we had some SME input, and our conversation came around because everything just says be an upstander, not a bystander. And we've talked about safety as a bystander, strategies for bystanders. And when I read your blurb on LinkedIn, it was, first of all, you have to be able to recognize the
yeah,
behavior.
absolutely.
That's why I'm interested. And I know it's Ofsted, we don't have that here, but we still have schools here. So we have settings and all of that. And I was just really interested to hear
Yeah.
what you're doing in your schools, one
I
recognise it, and in upstander education for teachers and staff.
Amazing. That's so interesting. So I have actually run sessions for uh, one or two organisations in Australia, believe it or not. And
Right.
because the sessions that I run do include sort of active bystanding skills, amongst others. So shall I crack on and then
Please do.
at the end, if you want, we can just have a conversation offline. Okay?
That's great. Now I'm going to tell you, I'm going to turn my sound off because it's dinner time here.
Okay, no problem.
And I've got my
What time
kids.
is it there? What
So
time is it?
it's 6:05 in the evening.
Oh, blimey. Okay, fair enough. Right, well,
Yeah,
I'll crack on. Got a lot to
great,
get through.
great.
If you want to take any notes and then we'll have a good chat about any questions you might have at the end. Is that okay? Or if it's
That's
absolutely
yeah.
burning, feel free to interrupt.
Okay, okay. Thank
Right,
you.
we'll
Right.
crack on. Okay.
All right. Bye.
So, um, welcome and thank you very much for attending my little webinar today. Uh, I do want to start off by saying how much schools are under extraordinary pressure and inspections are increasingly culture focused, and leaders now have to evidence not just policies but those lived values around behaviour, well-being and inclusion. And on top of that, in the UK, there has been a legal duty that was introduced in October 2024 under the Worker Protection Act to prevent sexual harassment at work. So that's for obviously colleagues and employees. That's the legal duty. And if that wasn't enough, on top of all of that, there's a new Ofsted framework. So they're really asking now, not just do you respond appropriately, but what are you actively doing to prevent it? So for ISI, which are the framework for independent schools in the UK, and Ofsted, they are both looking for schools that are taking a whole school approach to prevention, which will actively strengthen evidence for leadership, culture, safeguarding and staff well-being. So today I'm going to show you exactly what needs to change and how to do it without adding unnecessary workload, as well as sharing how I help organisations save time, protect employees and the communities that they serve. So you'll also have an opportunity to go on a wait list for a one-stop solution to support you with this duty. So I'm going to move on now to to tell you a little bit about myself, not much. It'll take about 10 seconds. So why listen to me? So I have about 20 years plus VAT experience, spent mainly in schools, and I've developed prevention of sexual harassment and wider harassment to groups of 6 online, right up to 90 in person. So I keep my knowledge really current through a group called the HR Inner Circle, which is run by an employment law barrister, because employment law in general just moves so fast. And I've also built a school specific service that has done the heavy lifting for you at a sector specific price. So for context on why this urgency matters is that employment tribunal claims in the UK rose 36% last year, and disability claims are up by 40%. And defending these costs, you're probably looking at around £50,000 even if you win. And on top of all of that, the Employment Rights Bill will accelerate this further. Particularly as well, we have an organisation called the Equality and Human Rights Commission, and there doesn't actually need to be a complaint put into place for them to get involved, and they have the power to add an extra 25% onto any sanctions, any financial sanctions awarded at tribunal. So let's firstly talk about any assumptions that might be putting your schools at risk. And please do feel free to say in the comments if you agree with this or if you don't, because these are my assumptions, and I don't work in a school. I have a lot of schools experience of working with schools, but I don't work in schools at the moment. So obviously you're here because you're committed to your students and your communities, and these assumptions aren't failures. They just reflect what used to be considered enough. So number one, which I see quite a lot, is we have a policy in recorded training, and we have met their obligations. So lots are doing this kind of training via recorded, which is absolutely fine when you've got loads and loads of employees, and the very nature of schools, it's really hard to get people together. So I get why a lot of them do use the recorded training, but the issue is that it's not specific to your school, and you're not getting that feedback back. So it has to be part of a much wider sort of cultural shift. So the question that has shifted is that inspectors, regulators and tribunals are asking, what are you actively doing to prevent this? So the question is not, do we care about it? It's, have you built the systems and confidence that demonstrate prevention? You know, can staff clearly describe professional boundaries? Do colleagues feel confident speaking up early? Would staff know how to intervene if something felt uncomfortable? Are leaders able to show evidence that they've assessed the risks and acted on them? These are the kind of things that inspectors increasingly explore when they talk to staff. So the gap for most schools isn't commitment, it's the time and expertise to get your head around it, the time to implement it, and the evidence. So with number one, it really is, has it actually changed any behaviour? Is it current? Is it understood? Is it reinforced? And what evidence do you have that you took reasonable steps to, and that particular requirement is getting a lot more challenging, which I'll go into a bit later. I have actually heard this specifically. We don't have any reports, so we don't have a problem. Well, that's not really, that's one of the most dangerous assumptions actually, because it misunderstands human behaviour. Low reporting almost always signals low trust. Perhaps people are unclear of the routes for fear of consequences. It doesn't mean that there's not an issue. So the gap is possibly psychological safety and staff voice. We don't have time, totally get this. I mean, schools just are under so much pressure, but done well, this is not an add-on. This cuts across leadership, safeguarding, well-being, attainment, and culture, and it reduces inspection pressure. Welcome, Mary. And it reduces inspection pressure rather than adding to it, and it has the potential to improve productivity and reduce grievances. So I'll show you how to do this without reinventing the wheel. The gap here is system design, because without it, leaders end up firefighting rather than evidencing. So number 4 is people are already used to reporting for safeguarding. And I do think that schools have a real advantage here. There is a culture of openness and transparency that is already embedded, but pupil safeguarding was never designed to manage adult workplace dynamics, power dynamics, staff to staff conduct, or third party harassment. So the ownership of this particular work needs to be throughout every single member of staff, but led obviously top down. And the gap is obviously the clear leadership ownership. And then this last one, we're going to deal with it if and when it arises. Well, the legal duty, that does not meet the legal duty anymore. And how you respond still absolutely matters and will be scrutinised. But from October 2026, the standard in the UK rises to all reasonable steps. And I'll go into a bit more about what that actually means a bit later on. So moving on, any questions so far? I'd love to know if there's any other assumptions, by the way, if you want to put them in the chat, things that are putting schools at risk. So what I think schools typically do is these very, very well-intentioned actions, and they're definitely part of what needs to be done. So if you are doing these, your efforts are not wasted, but alone they don't fully reduce the risk or satisfy the inspection scrutiny. So tell me in the chat, have you seen this in your schools? You know, policies are absolutely necessary, but not sufficient. They don't change behaviour unless people really understand them, trust them, and actually use them. Rolling out this generic training, I've already talked about this. You know, we've all done 30 minutes of online Zoom of training between 2 Zoom calls. And recorded training definitely does have its place, but does it change the behaviour? Case law is very, very clear on this in the UK. Ally versus Galen confirmed that an employer cannot rely on outdated, stale training as a defence. It has to be regular, and it has to be fit for purpose as well. And I just had a little message from Sandra. Yeah, schools are very good at appreciating the guidelines, and they're used to having quite a lot of these guidelines thrown at them, being in a regulated industry. So moving on, the responsibility as well, I mentioned before, very often gets placed on HR or a bursar or a school business manager. Now, school business managers in schools in the UK typically have an enormous remit. That's not to say anyone else's isn't just as big, but they're usually covering massive areas of the school, like HR and finance and facilities, and sometimes they have cleaners reporting into them. So really, it's everybody's personality personality, sorry. It's everyone's responsibility, but it really is leadership's responsibility to really lead on this and ensure that governors as well are up to speed and are asking the right questions. Assuming safeguarding covers it, I'm not sure if this absolutely happens, but I don't know if anybody's heard of the phrase culture eats strategy for breakfast. So strategy defines what you want to achieve, but culture determines how people actually behave when no one's watching. A policy no one understands and training no one remembers does not change culture, however well intentioned, and this stuff is important. Well, waiting until something happens, well, we've already been there. That's just not going to cut it in terms of the law right now. The system from where I sit is largely built for response rather than prevention currently, or at least prior to October 2024 when this legislation came in. And Ofsted information does need to be readily available at all times. My system does provide you with that. So there are some really shocking statistics, and to be honest, every time I switch on the news, I see some other horrific story regarding sexual harassment, either inside or outside the workplace. So these are just a few pieces, statistics that I've pulled out of a Unison survey, who are a union in the UK. Apologies, I sometimes stumble over my words. So this survey was conducted with 2006 school support staff across the UK. I really hope you can't hear that, but I am having work done at home and I hope you can't hear the drilling. So nurseries and special schools and preschool were also represented, and the headline numbers are really quite shocking, as you can see here. So in particular, 40% of staff wouldn't know what to do if they witnessed sexist or misogynistic behaviour, or 1 in 7 had witnessed sexual harassment in the last 5 years, and that rised as actually to 1 in 4 in secondary schools. And there is so much underreporting as well. 42% of those who experienced it did not report it. And the main reasons for that were it's pointless, being brushed off, or for fear of career consequences. And low reporting is not evidence of low prevalence. For every person who does report, many don't, because they just don't trust the system. And this isn't theoretical. Some examples that were from the actual survey were a head teacher making comments to staff members: stand here and look pretty, I'll do the talking. A headmaster texting a staff member requesting photos of her surgery. Boys attempting to touch female members of staff inappropriately. A male pupil attempting to assault a seated staff member. Year 5 boys using explicit sexual language to embarrass a female colleague is happening right now. And with awards in notable cases reaching 6 figures, it really is worth spending a good bit of time with this and getting it right. There was a rapid review survey with Ofsted back in 2021. And again, some really scary statistics. Again, 9 in 10 schools saying that sexist name calling has really been, a lot of this behaviour had effectively been normalised. Nearly 50% of boys said that they'd been sending explicit images that they didn't want to see. And sexual harassment had become so frequent that the children and young people considered it normal. my daughter at school, I think about age 5, was chased around the playground and by a bunch of boys looking running a couple of skirts. That's age 5. Um, so these kind of incidents are complex. Ofsted's conclusion was unambiguous. Schools should assume sexual harassment is happening even when there are no reports. So this review recommended a whole school approach. So staff modelling respectful behaviour, clear on what is or isn't acceptable. So unless your systems are designed to detect risk, they're not going to surface unless it's at crisis stage. So I started thinking about this and I thought, well, how are people actually going to, be able to even do this? Because it takes confidence to actually challenge this behaviour. And also, it's not always really, really overt. It's some of the behaviours are really, really subtle. And it's really good to know how to recognise that, because then things don't escalate. People aren't losing their jobs. The boundaries are clear. So this is called KICSI, we call it in the UK. And I'm referring to this a lot in the UK because we have someone from Australia on the call. So what KICSI expects now, so this is children safe, keeping children safe in education. So they expect as well, this is very safer recruitment and safeguarding training for schools, and they require a whole school preventative approach, and with colleagues being able to recognise that signs of harmful behaviour, as well as the clear professional boundaries, trusted reporting routes, and really clear leadership oversight. So staff must assume that harassment may be happening even under reporting. So it is explicit as well that downplaying behaviour, dismissing sexual harassment as just banter, boys being boys, part of growing up, creates a culture of unacceptable behaviour in an unsafe environment. And that applies to staff culture as much as pupil culture in the whole school approach that KICSI recommends. And while the focus very much is for children, the critical connection is that inspectors increasingly view adult and pupil culture as part of the same system. And the language in the new KICSI, that's part 5 of the draft guidance, backs this up and features a progressive continuum of sexual behaviours, explicitly highlighting how misogyny can lead to the normalisation of harassment and violence. And there's so much more on there, like safer recruitment updates for contractors and visitors. That's been updated as well, including classification on categories of visitors, as well as updated guidance on work experience and supervision. So this comes into reinforcing the third-party risk management, which I'm going to go into a bit later on. So where adult behaviour is unclear or inconsistent, pupils notice, and child-on-child harassment is much more likely to go unchallenged. Around 2/3 of schools changed their policies following the 2021 review, but policy change alone, as we've talked about earlier, is not enough. Normalisation creates pathways for escalation. So the Worker Protection Act and KICSI are now aligned, and both require proactive evidence prevention. So what is the legal duty in the UK? So the Worker Protection Act was introduced in October 2024, and that was the duty to prevent sexual harassment in the workplace. And the defence, as we'll call it, is to take reasonable steps, not to respond to it, but to prevent it. So this shifts the the question from did you deal with it to what did you do to prevent it. As I've said earlier, Quality and Human Rights Commission can enforce and investigate. No incident or complaint is needed, and a school with no risk assessment or stale training or no reporting system is already really exposed. Reasonable steps in this case means proactive, proportionate action, but what is reasonable for one organisation will be, might not be reasonable for another. In April 2026 in the UK, the reporting of sexual harassment is now a protected whistleblowing disclosure. So a worker who raises concerns in the public interest is protected from dismissal and detriment. And mishandling a complaint now could simultaneously trigger a harassment claim, a 25% compensation uplift, and an uncapped whistleblowing claim. So individual grievances are unlikely to meet the public interest threshold, but it needs to indicate a broader pattern or systematic failure. In October 2026, the reasonable steps duty is rising to all reasonable steps. So this is a materially higher bar where any gap that could have been reasonably filled and was not will not be defensible. In addition, third-party harassment duty is expanding significantly. So schools must not permit harassment of staff by third parties, and this includes so a third party is anyone that you come into contact with as part of your job who is not another employee. So this can be workers, so agency staff, contractors, supply staff, parents, visitors, if you go on conferences, anyone you come into contact with on those kind of things, school trips, and this covers all protected characteristics, not just sexual harassment. In 2027, the government will also be getting powers to define exactly what reasonable means, which will help, but again, it will need to be tailored for each organisation. I'll be following this with interest because I don't really know how they can do that, because, like I said, what is right for one industry might not be right for another. So why this matters? You've only got to open your phone to find the latest Harrods BBC surgeon expose, and there's so much evidence that, sorry, I've just got to plug in my computer. I should have plugged it in, shouldn't I? 1 in 4 of workers globally have experienced harassment or violence at work, and it really is worth really putting some effort into this, because engaged safe workforces, according to Gallup, report 22% higher productivity. Tribunal claims rose from 39 to 57% between 2024 and 25, and the highest sex discrimination award in 23-24 was nearly £1 million. It's the right thing to do, it's good for business, and it is the law, and it's getting tougher. So this is the Ofsted toolkit currently, and it doesn't name these connections explicitly, but the evidence linking them is strong, and a confident leader should be able to articulate it under inspector questioning. So that's actually a lot more compelling than pretending that you don't know what's going on in your own school. So inspectors are looking for evidence of real behaviour change, what happens day to day, not just what the policy says. And this will help you to really articulate how you identify risk, how you listen to staff and act proportionately. Safeguarding now has a met or not met binary judgment and is non-negotiable. They want to know that staff understand the scale and range of sexual harassment, and that reporting systems are clear and trusted, and that leaders have a whole school preventative approach. Safeguarding isn't only about pupils, it's about whether adults in the organisation are protected and feel safe to raise those concerns. The toolkit talks about attendance and behaviour. This isn't something, again, inappropriate behaviour must not be tolerated. And, you know, going back to that survey with the risks, not only from other staff, but from pupils and parents. So from an inclusion point of view, sexual harassment does disproportionately affect girls and women and those with protected characteristics. That's not to say that it doesn't affect boys as well. And inspectors do look for leaders who identify and address these barriers to well-being for those sharing a protected characteristic. So a preventative framework that I've developed, including anonymous voice mechanisms and risk assessments, evidence that the school identifies and acts on hidden vulnerabilities, not just the visible ones. From a curriculum and teaching point of view, where harassment is normalised, it does become a barrier to learning. And staff who are trained are more effective at delivering the values-led relational education this area demands. And this really, particularly if we introduce it into primary schools, it provides more of a basis for RSHE and provides that understanding, and hopefully that, you know, mimicking those respectful behaviours will help with learning later on. I'll just briefly touch on well-being. It's fairly obvious. If people are happier, people learn better, and yeah, you don't get attendance problems so much. And also, if people know how to, you know, challenge concerning behaviour, that's going to contribute to a curriculum that actively removes that barrier. With leadership as well, they also need the tools and support to be able to challenge and answer inspection questions. And again, I touch on that in my toolkit, in my framework. They're not left out at all. So what might be happening now is quite a reactive cycle. So you can see here, you write a policy, do a spot of training once, there might be a few issues, you react to it, and then you take actions. But what I have developed is a much more proactive approach, where the common gaps are plugged. So prevention is reactive, mine is very much proactive. And the risks are quite big at this stage. Policies obviously exist, but they're not lived. And are they all updated? For example, your whistleblowing policy now needs to be updated as well. Talked about the generic training. The third party element is huge. And from October 26th, third party harassment extends to all protected characteristics. So that is a big one, particularly for schools. Reporting systems might not be trusted. And as I mentioned before, low reporting is not reassurance. Ownership might rest as well with too few people, or does not permeate throughout the organisation. So this is what my framework looks like. And it's about having that leadership ownership. You identify the risks early and you take action. All of these elements are always being constantly reviewed, and there is a specific comms plan as well that supports all of this. as well as practical tailored training to the organisation, the industry. There's a reference on my LinkedIn from a school that I did in person of inset training with in January this year. So I trained 90 people, and they needed specific language that would have been triggering for some people. So, and I needed to understand as well where they were coming from and where perhaps the gaps were, perhaps there'd been some incidents. So I always tailor all of it. Also have some cultural tools that will help to continue to check the temperature in terms of workplace culture, and ensure that you're not on the back foot at any stage. And these really are the all reasonable steps. Reporting routes, I've got to deal with an anonymous confidential reporting system, and that ensures as well that staff voice is listened to. The training is followed up with a quiz so we can assess any gaps and get that feedback about what else organisations can be doing. And this is reviewed regularly. So how do we prevent sexual harassment? I've just done a really quick whistle stop show, trip through that. So you start off, you must do a risk assessment. You're unlikely to be able to demonstrate reasonable steps without one. And the Equality and Human Rights Commission in the UK is explicit on this, and it needs to be very tailored to your school context, your staff profile, third-party relationships, reporting history, and then it needs to be a live document, not a one-off exercise. Think about lone working, when is alcohol present, all of those kind of things. Practical tailored training for everyone, and not tick box. E-learning completed between 2 Zoom calls is unlikely to prevent a specific defence in this case. And this means all staff, managers with the responsibilities for handling disclosures, governors, trustees, new starters, how are you capturing them? Managers in particular need to understand when a complaint might amount to a protected whistleblowing disclosure. Getting that wrong now carries uncapped compensation risk. Training obviously needs to be current, regular, and assessed for effectiveness. Clear reporting channels, preferably anonymous, and people need to understand how to deal with complaints as well. A poorly handled complaint can now simultaneously trigger a harassment claim, and a 25% compensation uplift, and an uncapped whistleblowing claim. Third-party management to proactively identify the risks from contractors, supply staff, visitors, agency workers. Make sure you're communicating your standards really clearly through your agreements, induction, visible expectations. Again, this is included in the framework I offer. And from October 2026, there you do have that duty to prevent harassment from third parties. Ensure that you're monitoring and reviewing this regularly as well. So look at survey results, training uptake, knowledge gaps, review regularly, look at complaint data, investigation timescales. What is appropriate for your organisation will depend on what you're doing. So apologies about the tricking, but I couldn't find a better image. So why does this need urgent attention? It might feel safer to wait and see if nothing happens. And yes, that is an approach, but the evidence says the opposite. And when things do escalate, the cost in leadership time, staff trust, reputation, and from a financially point of view, it exceeds any investment in prevention. And legally, doing nothing now is indefensible. So the riskiest position for a school isn't getting this wrong, it's assuming you're fine and not checking. It's a really wide duty as well. Someone can overhear or see inappropriate behaviour, even if it's not directed at them, and that could give rise to a claim. People don't have to complain as well for there to be a risk. Similarly, someone could join in with the banter and then subsequently submit a claim. It's also a proactive responsibility, and they must actively implement measures to prevent harassment rather than responding after the event. It goes without saying how much time any kind of investigations, let alone tribunal claims, take on precious leadership time, and that's time you could be spending on the children. The risks are, like inconsistent staff answers, weak safeguarding evidence, governors who can't confidently respond, safeguarding judged ineffective even without a serious incident. There's obviously the legal risks, legal costs far exceeding prevention investment, tribunal scrutiny of training, risk assessment and leadership oversight. There's a safeguarding risk to pupils, where adult culture tolerates sexualised language, blurred boundaries or minimisation of concerns. Staff with well-being risk as well. You're going to get higher absences, and low-level behaviour escalates quietly in the background, or they just leave, and that costs you money as well. So that's, I think, pretty much I've said enough on that. Let's move on. So why choose me? Here's just a few quotes from some of the training that I've done, and there's one actually on my LinkedIn that I put on today, on Monday the 11th of May, from a very happy school, and it was an absolute delight. This is the kind of work that I absolutely love, and it's a complete framework, and this is what it covers: communication. So I also do posters. There's a couple of policies, there's checklists to ensure that all the other policies reinforce it. Support for Ofsted and governance alignment, as well as a checklist for governors, so they or board members. Sorry, there's an echo. Thank you. Thank you. And there's a full risk assessment as well as full guidance and preventative action, and reporting and voice, so access to an anonymous reporting platform, as well as HR survey questions, reporting system. There's a great culture tool as well in there that gets you, enables you to have in the moment information on your staff. So yeah, and that's monthly. I think it's called what three words or what three phrases. So it's really quick for staff to complete, and you get the feedback immediately summarised on the 1st of every month. In terms of training, I cover everyone, all the stakeholders, so staff, managers, governors, refresher training, champions, induction, as well as I check that the information as well is going in, and if not, where are the gaps, and you get access to all of that. And coming soon is a staff safeguarding platform, where you will have real-time access to always up-to-date resources, and tailored resources for your industry, on-demand access, as well as lots of other tools and support. And this will grow and grow as I get more people on the platform and they can say to me, actually, this would be really helpful. So you collectively benefit from this hive mind. And I really hope that this has been helpful for you. If you want to get on the wait list, drop me an email, chantal@crosscheckconsultancy.co.uk, or if you have any other questions about this. And I'm very happy to be able to provide you as well for a Where You're At review, which will include a personalised 20-minute feedback session with me. And the next webinar will be in 3 weeks' time. Thank you very much for listening. Any questions? I'm just going to stop the recording.
Hi, Chantal.
Hi.
The